They told you education is the great equalizer, that no matter where you come from, if you just study hard enough, keep your head down, and believe in the system, you'll make it. Rich or poor, privileged or struggling, school was supposed to be the one fair playing field. But here's the question. If education is so equal, why do the outcomes still look so unequal? Why do kids from wealthy backgrounds glide into top universities while others claw their way through underfunded schools just hoping for a functioning bathroom? Why do some students get SAT tutors and gap years abroad, while others juggle 2 part-time jobs and still fall behind? We say everyone has the same opportunity, but we never ask what that opportunity actually costs. Equality on paper isn't the same as equality in practice. The system claims to lift people up, but often just sorts them neatly into their place. This isn't just about effort, it's about access. It's about how education, instead of erasing privilege, quietly reinforces it, with a smile, a scholarship, and 1,000 hidden barriers. So today, let's look past the brochure and ask, is education really equal, or is it just a polished mask for inequality? Meritocracy or myth? The story goes like this: education is the ladder. If you want to rise, just climb. Doesn't matter who your parents are, where you live, or what your last name is. If you work hard in school, you'll make it. That's the promise of meritocracy. It sounds fair, modern, almost noble. But like many polished myths, it quietly distracts from reality. Because the ladder, it's not the same length for everyone. Some start near the top, others begin with broken rungs. Let's look at the word merit. It's supposed to mean ability, talent, hard work. But in practice, it often means access. Access to quiet spaces to study, to parents who can help with homework, to schools that aren't falling apart, to teachers who stay long enough to care, to nutrition, safety, time, and mental health support. All of these invisible structures shape who succeeds, but none of them show up on the final exam. A student who spends hours tutoring a sibling or working late shifts is not less motivated than the student who spends weekends at a robotics camp. They're just playing different games under the same name. And yet, when the grades come in, when the college letters arrive, we treat the outcome as meritocratic, as if it's simply a reflection of effort. That's not fairness. That's selective blindness. The system praises high achievers, but rarely asks what helped them achieve. Was it the $200 an hour private tutor, the custom college consultant, the school district funded by property taxes in a wealthy zip code? Meanwhile, students in marginalized neighborhoods fight for outdated textbooks and get told they're behind. Behind what? A race they were never truly invited to run? Even the rituals of meritocracy are steeped in privilege. College applications ask for extracurriculars, travel experiences, polished essays that reflect maturity and perspective. But what if your experience doesn't come with polished edges? What if your lessons came from survival, not summer programs? Meritocracy doesn't know what to do with that. It wants resilience, but only if it's neat. It wants struggle, but only if it's inspiring. It wants diversity, but only if it doesn't challenge how power is distributed. And here's where it gets trickier. The system convinces the winners that they earned everything, and the others that they simply didn't try hard enough. If you succeed, it's because you're exceptional. If you fail, it's your fault. This isolates both groups. The privileged are kept unaware, the disadvantaged are kept ashamed. And the system? It keeps functioning smoothly, protected by the myth that it's all fair. This is not a conspiracy. It's much more ordinary than that. It's in how school funding is tied to local wealth, how standardized tests reflect cultural bias, how admissions favor legacies, donations, and the polished confidence that only privilege can buy. It's not that individual students don't work hard. They do. But when some people have a head start and others are running with weights on their ankles, hard work alone doesn't level the field. And yet the myth persists. It's powerful because it tells a comforting story. That education is neutral. That school is where inequality comes to die. That anyone can make it if they just try hard enough. But the truth is, education is not neutral. It reflects the very society it claims to transcend. It rewards those who already have and asks others to catch up using tools they were never given. So what do? First, we name it. We admit that meritocracy, as it's currently practiced, is a story designed to justify inequality. Then, we stop measuring success by outcomes alone and start asking what conditions made those outcomes possible. We rethink what merit even means. Not just scores, but growth. Not just polish, but perspective. Not just performance, but presence, honesty, and the ability to question the system you're inside. Because until we do that, equal education will stay a slogan printed in school handbooks and political speeches, a shiny idea that hides a much messier truth. That school, for all its good intentions, still reflects the world outside, and the world outside is far from fair. The geography of opportunity education is supposed to be the one place where your background doesn't determine your future. But let's get real. Your zip code often says more about your academic destiny than your IQ. The idea that everyone has the same shot is comforting, but step back and look around. Some schools have iPads in every classroom and yoga breaks, while others are still holding bake sales to buy toilet paper. Welcome to the geography of opportunity. Where you live determines where you learn, and where you learn often shapes how you live. It's a loop. A well-funded neighborhood typically means a well-funded school. Why? Because in many places education is funded through local property taxes, meaning the richer the area, the richer the school. It's not education. It's real estate with desks. You want better opportunities? Move to a better zip code, if you can. So let's paint two pictures. In one school, students have access to music, art, AP classes, new science labs, and career counselors. In another, there's overcrowding, aging buildings, constant teacher turnover, and a cop patrolling the hallways. Both are part of the public education system. But one looks like a launch pad. The other looks like containment. This isn't about a few unlucky schools, it's structural. Neighborhood segregation, by class, by race, by history, didn't disappear. It just evolved, and with it, the resources allocated to different schools. We say education is the great equalizer, but the starting lines aren't even close. Some kids begin the race with a running coach and perfect shoes. Others are told to sprint barefoot on broken concrete and smile for the yearbook photo. And yet we act surprised when the test scores look different. When college admissions don't diversify, when opportunity remains mysteriously correlated with income. We blame underperformance, but never ask, under what conditions were they expected to perform? Let's talk about environment. A student in a low-income neighborhood might face food insecurity, unstable housing, violence, chronic stress, and still, we expect them to compete on the same standardized test as someone who ate breakfast, had a private tutor, and slept in a quiet home. One is trying to survive, the other is trying to get into Yale. But the test doesn't care. It just grades the bubble sheet. Even access to things like fresh air and safety shape learning. Ever tried writing an essay when your classroom has no heat in winter? Ever tried concentrating with lead in your water or noise from a busy street pounding through broken windows? These aren't dramatic stories. They're daily realities for millions of students. But because we don't experience all schools equally, we keep believing the illusion that education is fair. And geography doesn't just affect physical resources, it shapes expectations. In wealthier schools, students are seen as future leaders. In underfunded schools, they're often seen as problems to be managed. Discipline policies are harsher, creative programs are fewer, hope is rationed, guidance counselors are overwhelmed, college feels like a dream someone else is having. But here's the most dangerous part. This inequality is hidden behind the mask of neutrality. We don't say this school is failing because we starved it of support. We say that student didn't try hard enough. It's subtle, but devastating. Because when students internalize that message, they don't just give up on school, they give up on themselves. And for those who do make it out, get a scholarship, move to a better school, break through the statistics, it's often at the cost of emotional exhaustion. They carry survivor's guilt, imposter syndrome, cultural dislocation. They're praised as proof that the system works, while quietly becoming evidence that it doesn't. One person's success is used to justify another's oppression. But what if we didn't just admire the outliers? What if we asked why the average experience varies so drastically depending on your address? What if we stopped pretending that opportunity was evenly distributed and started acknowledging that it's rationed by design? Because if we continue to ignore the geography of opportunity, We're not just failing students, we're lying to them, telling them the map is flat when it's full of cliffs, telling them the system is open when the gates are locked, telling them that if they don't succeed, it's because they didn't try, when the truth is, they were set up to lose a rigged game. This isn't about blame, it's about clarity, about seeing education not just as a collection of classrooms, but as a reflection of how we distribute care, value, and investment. It's about asking better questions. Not why are some students falling behind, but why do we keep putting them there? Because education will never be equal until access is, until zip code no longer determines trajectory, until we stop pretending the system works because a few make it out and start building a system where everyone can thrive, not just escape. Curriculum of the elite. Here's a question you're not supposed to ask. Why do wealthy kids seem to get a different education, while still attending schools that claim to follow the same curriculum? The textbooks may be similar, the diplomas may look identical, but the experience entirely different. Because education in practice isn't just about what you learn, it's about what you're taught to expect. And when it comes to the elite, the lesson is clear. The world is already yours. Let's break it down. In elite private schools or elite-tier public ones nestled in affluent districts, students are not just taught algebra or history, they're taught confidence, self-advocacy, global citizenship. They're encouraged to question, to lead, to imagine themselves as decision-makers. Discussion replaces rote memorization. Projects replace punishments. Learning feels expansive, not mechanical. Mistakes are seen as growth, not failure. Everything subtly reinforces one message: your voice matters. Now contrast that with schools in working class or marginalized communities. Here, the education is more about management than empowerment. The curriculum is rigid, the schedule is strict, rules are absolute. Questioning authority isn't intellectual, it's insubordination. You don't explore, you comply. You aren't encouraged to speak out, you're trained to sit still. What's being taught isn't just math or grammar, it's discipline, obedience, survival. This isn't just a stylistic difference, it's a social sorting mechanism. While one group is prepared to lead, the other is prepared to follow. While one is groomed for creation, the other is trained for repetition. The curriculum reflects the future the system expects of you. And so school becomes less about lifting everyone up, and more about quietly reinforcing the world as it is. Even within the same education system, these hidden curriculums persist. It's not just what's taught, it's how. Critical thinking is encouraged in one classroom, discouraged in another. Debate clubs flourish in places where students are expected to become CEOs or politicians, but not where they're expected to join the workforce straight out of high school. Why teach a child to challenge systems if the system doesn't expect them to have power? Take language, for example. In elite schools, students are taught to code switch not out of fear, but out of strategy. They're taught professionalism as an aesthetic, not as an existential requirement. But in lower-income schools, the same behavior, being loud, emotional, informal, gets framed as disruptive. It's not just what you say, it's who you're allowed to be while saying it. And when it comes to resources, it's not just more, it's different. Wealthy schools don't just have newer buildings and smaller class sizes. They offer robotics labs, philosophy electives, arts programs, guest speakers, mentorships, internships, trips abroad. They connect students with networks that stretch into universities, boardrooms, creative industries. It's not about grades, it's about grooming. Not in the sinister sense, but in the subtle, systemic sense. Students are socialized into power. They're given not just education, but advantage. Meanwhile, students elsewhere are taught resilience, because that's all they'll need to survive what lies ahead. They learn to make do, to adapt, to overcome barriers that shouldn't exist in the first place. And society applauds this. We love stories of students who beat the odds, but we rarely question why those odds are there to begin with. Why do some kids get to explore ideas while others are drilled in discipline? Why do some get permission to imagine while others are taught to behave? This split is philosophical. Education at its best should ask, what kind of human are you becoming? But in practice, it too often asks, what kind of worker will you be? The elite are taught to build systems. The rest are trained to fit into them. It's a caste system disguised as a syllabus. And perhaps the most dangerous part is that both groups believe it's normal. The elite believe they earned their enrichment. The working class believe they just didn't qualify for more. The system doesn't just shape knowledge, it shapes identity. It defines what students believe they deserve, what they expect from the world, and what they expect from themselves. This is how education maintains inequality without ever raising its voice. It hides behind a common curriculum and pretends that equal access means equal experience. It pretends that because everyone is technically learning math, the game is fair. But we know better. Curriculum isn't neutral. It's a story, and not everyone is being told the same one. So what would a just curriculum look like? One that doesn't just replicate privilege, but redistributes possibility. It would include critical pedagogy, emotional intelligence, economic literacy. It would teach students to question not only the material, but the power structures behind it. It would prepare students not just for exams, but for democracy, for dignity, for collective agency. Because the purpose of education should never be to polish the elite and pacify the rest. It should be to awaken everyone to their power and to equip them to use it. That requires more than equal materials. It requires equal respect, equal imagination, and equal access to the tools of transformation. Until then, let's stop calling it a common curriculum. Because the truth is, we're not all being prepared for the same world. The hidden tuition of free education. They say public education is free. No tuition fees, no entry exams, everyone's welcome. It sounds generous, democratic, even noble. But look closer and you'll see the invisible invoice. Because while the classroom might not ask for your money up front, it does ask for other things. Time, labor, stability, silence, identity. And some students end up paying far more than others. Not in dollars, but in dignity. Let's begin with the obvious. Free school often comes with hidden costs. Supplies, uniforms, transportation, lunch money, internet access, devices. A project that requires printing at home or buying materials assumes every household has those things. Field trips? Optional, but socially pressured. Advanced classes? Often come with fees. Tutoring? A luxury. Free begins to look like a sales pitch with a lot of small print. But beyond material costs, there are deeper, more personal tolls. The emotional tax of navigating a system that wasn't designed for you. The mental labor of code switching, of trying to belong in a space that silently says you don't. For marginalized students, this can mean erasing parts of themselves just to move through the day. Tone down the accent, hide the anxiety. Don't ask too many questions. Be grateful, even when it hurts. This isn't dramatization, it's normalization. Students who come from non-dominant backgrounds, racially, culturally, economically, are often expected to adapt to a standard that was set without them in mind. And adaptation has a cost. Because every time you bend yourself to fit, you lose a little sense of who you are. School tells you it's about inclusion, but only if you shrink yourself to fit the mold. The message is clear: assimilate or be left behind. And then there's the cost of invisibility. For many students, especially those from underrepresented communities, the curriculum doesn't reflect them. Their histories are footnotes. Their perspectives are electives. Their pain is either sanitized or ignored. Imagine being told education is your tool for empowerment, while being asked to constantly study the triumphs of those who oppressed people like you. That's not just exclusion. That's a psychological toll. But it doesn't stop there. Let's talk about stress. Chronic, quiet, grinding stress. Trying to stay focused while worrying about rent. Trying to finish homework when you're helping raise your siblings. Trying to stay awake in class after a night shift. These are not excuses. These are unspoken costs. And yet, when performance slips, the system rarely pauses to ask why. It just marks a lower grade and moves on. The price is also social. Students without the right clothes, the right gadgets, the right cultural fluency can become targets of judgment, of bullying, of erasure. There's no invoice for that, but it shapes a student's experience as surely as any tuition bill would. We talk a lot about bullying in schools, but rarely about the quiet social codes that separate students into belongs and barely tolerated. And then there's the price of precarity. If your school lacks counselors, safe spaces, extracurricular support, or even functioning infrastructure, your learning is constantly under threat. But you're still expected to perform, still judged by the same metrics, still compared to peers who've never had to choose between safety and education. This is the ultimate hidden tuition, demanding resilience from those we refuse to resource. Even the idea of free education assumes that students are entering on equal footing, that they're ready to learn. But trauma, hunger, systemic discrimination, these things don't wait outside the classroom. They follow students in. And pretending they don't exist, pretending school is just about learning, only makes things worse. Education becomes not a support system, but a test of survival, a place where only the most adaptable thrive and the rest are quietly filtered out. And yet, when these students make it, when they graduate despite the odds, we call them inspiring. We share their stories as proof the system works. But what we're really saying is, look at what they overcame. Not, why did they have to overcome so much in the first place? We romanticize the survivors, but ignore the graveyard of potential we allowed to slip through the cracks. Let's flip the question. What would truly free education look like? Not just free of tuition, but free of shame, free of erasure, free of hidden expectations and double standards. It would mean schools that adapt to students, not just students adapting to schools. It would mean trauma-informed practices, culturally relevant curriculum, flexible pathways, universal access to mental health, food security, and digital tools. It would mean rethinking what success even looks like and who gets to define it. Because right now, education says, we welcome everyone, but then whispers, as long as you pay with conformity. That's not equality. That's subtle coercion. That's asking the most vulnerable to carry the system's weight and calling it opportunity. Let's be honest, free education isn't free until everyone pays the same price. And right now, some are paying with their future. Education or inheritance? We like to believe that education is the opposite of inheritance, that it's what you earn, not what you're born into, that it levels the playing field, breaks the cycle, changes the story, that through school anyone, regardless of background, can rise above. But when you look closely, education starts to feel less like a ladder, and more like a mirror, one that reflects the privileges you entered with. Because in practice, what school offers you depends heavily on what your family already had. Let's start with the basics. Wealthy parents don't just pass down money. They pass down time, stability, connections, and knowledge of the system. They know how to navigate education because they were beneficiaries of it. They know how to talk to teachers, how to write emails that get responses, how to argue for exceptions, how to prepare a child to appear exceptional. Meanwhile, families without that insider access are often left to guess, improvise, or trust a system that doesn't always trust them back. From early childhood, this difference compounds. Some children grow up in language-rich environments, exposed to books, travel, museums, structured play. They learn to speak the language of success before they even step into a classroom. Others grow up in chaos, instability, or neglect, not from lack of love, but from lack of time, resources, or safe space. The school claims to treat these children equally, but how can it when they arrive carrying such different invisible baggage? Even the way we talk about parental involvement is coded. It assumes time, energy, and a familiarity with the school's cultural expectations. It assumes a parent can leave work for a conference, that they can afford a babysitter, that they feel empowered enough to speak up without fear. Inheritance isn't just about wealth. It's about social comfort, knowing you belong in the room, knowing your voice will be heard. That's passed down too. Now let's talk college. Higher education is framed as the payoff of K-12 schooling. Work hard, earn a spot, escape your circumstances. But college admissions are not meritocracies. They're economies of legacy, branding, and polish. Legacy applicants whose parents attended the school are given preference. Donations open doors. Prestige networks circulate recommendation letters. Even the way you write your personal statement is often a reflection of how much coaching you could afford. This isn't education. It's inheritance with an essay prompt. And it doesn't stop at admission. Once in, students from privileged backgrounds often glide through with support systems already in place. Family-funded housing, safety nets, quiet places to study, professional wardrobes for internships, connections to get those internships in the first place. Others, meanwhile, are juggling jobs, sending money home, managing crisis after crisis in silence, and being told they're all playing the same game. It's not a fair match. It's two realities under one roof. And what about post-graduation? The transition into adulthood isn't smooth for everyone. Some graduates have parents who can help with rent while they find the right job. Others have to take whatever job pays immediately. Some can afford to wait for passion, others can't afford passion at all. We call it the freedom to choose, but freedom itself is inherited. And education, while helpful, doesn't always erase that gap. In fact, it often widens it by pretending it doesn't exist. Even within professional spaces, we find that degrees don't guarantee dignity. Job interviews often hinge not just on qualifications, but on fit, on how well someone conforms to a set of social norms, dress, accent, confidence, small talk, all of which are learned behaviors deeply tied to class background. Two candidates with the same degree may receive radically different treatment based on how well they mirror the culture of power. And yet, we still point to the diploma and say, see, equal opportunity. So what's the real lesson here? That education, as it stands, doesn't cancel inheritance. It coexists with it. It polishes it. It even protects it. The children of privilege are handed tools for success before the rest even find out tools exist. And then we all pretend the system is fair. That school is the solution, not part of the structure. But education doesn't have to play this role. It could challenge inheritance instead of reinforcing it. Imagine a system that didn't just replicate inequality with nicer vocabulary. Imagine if schools taught students to interrogate power, not just climate. Imagine if they were resourced not by zip code, but by need. If curriculum reflected every student's world, not just the worldview of those in charge. If schools gave all students, not just the well-placed, a real shot at shaping the world, not just surviving it. Because real equity doesn't mean pretending inheritance doesn't exist. It means designing education to interrupt it. Until then, let's stop pretending a diploma alone levels the field. It doesn't. Not when some students start the race with decades of momentum behind them, and others are told to run twice as hard just to stay in place. We were told that education is the answer, that it opens doors, lifts people up, levels the field. And yes, in theory, it can. But theory doesn't pay attention to zip codes. It doesn't ask who owns the door or who holds the key. Because in practice, education too often reinforces the very inequality it promises to erase. It becomes the polite face of a rigged game, one where your future depends less on how hard you try and more on where you started. And still, we tell students, just work harder, just believe in the system, as if systemic barriers are personal failures, as if grit can overcome structural neglect, as if inherited advantage doesn't wear a cap and gown too. This isn't a call to abandon education, it's a call to reimagine it, to stop pretending that equal access means equal outcome, to stop measuring success by who makes it out and start asking why anyone had to escape in the first place, to design schools not just as factories for achievement, but as spaces for justice, curiosity, and collective dignity. Because education shouldn't be a sorting hat for privilege, it should be the slow, careful dismantling of it. So let's be honest about the story we've been told. Let's challenge the version that makes inequality look like failure and privilege look like merit. Let's stop polishing the system and start rebuilding it, from the inside out. If this message resonated with you, share it. Start the conversation. Ask your school, your community, your leaders, who really benefits from the way we educate, and who's being left behind. Subscribe for more videos that dig beneath the surface, challenge the obvious, and imagine something better. Because real change begins not with perfect answers, but with courageous questions. Let's ask them, together.